Chapter 7. There are casual readers who may consider the scene described in the last chapter unnatural. It may be said that a youth, whose life had been chequered by trials and disasters, but who preserved a pure sensibility throughout them, is sadly distorted when portrayed as expanding, at a leap, into a desperado. I have but little to say in reply to these objections, save that the occurrences are perfectly true as stated, and, moreover, that I am satisfied they were only the natural developments of my character. From my earliest years I have adored nobility of soul, and detested dishonor and treachery. I have passed through scenes which will be hereafter told, that the world may qualify by harsh names, yet I have striven to conduct myself throughout them, not only with the ideas of fairness current among reckless men, but with the truth that, under all circumstances, characterizes an honorable nature. Now, the tragedy of my first night on the Rio Pongo was my transition from papalage to responsible independence. I do not allege in a boastful spirit that I was a man of courage, because courage, or the want of it, are things for which a person is no more responsible than he is for the possession or lack of physical strength. I was, moreover, always a man of what I may style self-possessed passion. I was endowed with something more than cool energy, or rather cool energy was heightened and sublimated by the fire of an ardent nature. Hitherto, I had been tempered down by the habitual obedience to which I was subjected as a sailor under lawful discipline. Events of the last 6 months, and especially the gross relaxation on the voyage to Afrique, the risks we had run in navigating the vessel, and the outlaws that surrounded me, not only kept my mind forever on the alert, but aroused my dormant nature to a full sense of duty and self-protection. Is it unnatural, then, for a man whose heart and nerves have been laid bare for months, to quiver with agony and respond with headlong violence when imperiled character, property, and life hang upon the fiat of his courageous promptitude? The doubters may cavil over the philosophy, but I think I may remain content with the fact. I did my duty. Dreadful as it was, let me draw a veil over our gory decks when the gorgeous sun of Africa shot his first rays through the magnificent trees and herbage that hemmed the placid river. 5 bodies were cast into the stream, and the traces of the tragedy obliterated as well as possible. The recreant mate, who plunged into the cabin at the report of the first pistol from the forecastle, reappeared with haggard looks and trembling frame, to protest that he had no hand in what he called the murder. The cook, boatswain, and African pilot recounted the whole transaction to the master, who inserted it in the logbook and caused me to sigu the narrative with unimplicated witnesses. Then the wound of the cabin boy was examined and found to be trifling, while mine, though not painful, was thought to imperil my sight. The flint lock of a rebounding pistol had inflicted 3 gashes, just beneath the eye on my cheek. There was but little appetite for breakfast that day. After the story was told and recorded, we went sadly to work unmooring the vessel, bringing her slowly like a hearse to an anchorage in front of Bangalang, the residence and factory of Mr. Ormond, better known by the country name of Mongo John. This personage came on board early in the morning with our returned captain, and promised to send a native doctor to cure both my eye and the boy's leg, making me pledge him a visit as soon as the vessel's duties would permit. That evening the specie was landed, and the schooner left in my charge by the master, with orders to strip, repair, and provide for the voyage home. Before night, Mongo John fulfilled his promise of a physician, who came on board with his prescription, not in his pocket, but by his side. He ordered my torn cheek to be bathed every half hour with human milk fresh from the breast, and, in order to secure a prompt, pure, and plentiful supply, a stout negress and her infant were sent, with orders to remain as long as her lacteal services might be required. I cannot say whether nature or the remedy healed my wound, but in a short time the flesh cicatrized and all symptoms of inflammation disappeared entirely. It required 10 days to put the aerostatico in ship shape and supply her with wood and water. Provisions had been brought from Havana, so that it was only necessary we should stow them in an accessible manner. As our schooner was extremely small, we possessed no slave deck. Accordingly, mats were spread over the fire, wood which filled the interstices of the water casks in order to make an even surface for our cargo's repose. When my tiresome task was done, I went ashore almost for the first time to report progress to the master, but he was still unprepared to embark his living freight, Large sums, far in advance of the usual market, were offered by him for a cargo of boys. Still, we were delayed full 20 days longer than our contract required before a supply reached Bangalang. As I had promised Mongo John, or John the Chief, to visit his factory, I took this opportunity to fulfill my pledge. He received me with elaborate politeness, showed me his town, barracoons and stores, and even stretched a point to honor me by an introduction to the penetralia of his harem. The visit paid, he insisted that I should dine with him, and a couple of choice bottles were quickly disposed of. Ormond, like myself, had been a sailor. We spoke of the lands, scenes and adventures each had passed through, while a fresh bottle was called to fill up our memories. Friendship as wine. Before sundown, our electric memories had circled the globe, and our intimacy culminated. There is nothing so nourishing too. While the rosy fluid operated as a sedative on the Mongo and glued him to his chair in a comfortable nap, it had a contrary effect on my exhilarated nerves. I strolled to the veranda to get a breath of fresh air from the river, but soon dashed off in the darkness to the sacred precincts of the harem. I was not detected till I reached nearly the center of the sanctuary where Ormond confined his motley group of black, mulatto, and quarteroon wives. The first dame who perceived me was a bright mulatto, with rosy cheeks, sloe-like eyes, coquettish turban, and most voluptuous mouth, whom I afterwards discovered to be second in the chief's affections. In an instant, the court resounded with a chattering call to her companions, so that, before I could turn, the whole band of gabbling parrots hemmed me in with a deluge of talk. Fame had preceded me. My sable nurse was a servant of the harem, and her visit to the schooner, with the tale of the tragedy, supplied anecdotes for a lifetime. Everybody was on the qui-vive to see the white fighter. Everybody was crazy to feel the white skin she had healed. Then, with a sudden, childish freak of caprice, they ran off from me as if afraid, and at once rushed back again, like a flock of glib-tongued and playful monkeys. I could not comprehend a word they said, but the bevy squealed with quite as much pleasure as if I did, and peered into my eyes for answers, with impish devilry at my wondering ignorance. At last my sable friends seemed not only anxious to amuse themselves, but to do something for my entertainment also. A chatter in a corner settled what it should be. 2 or 3 brought sticks, while 2 or 3 brought coals. A fire was quickly kindled in the center of the court, and as its flames lit up the area, a whirling circle of half-stripped girls danced to the monotonous beat of a tom-tom. Presently the formal ring was broken, and each female stepping out singly, danced according to her individual fancy. Some were wild, some were soft, some were tame, and some were fiery. After so many years, I have no distinct recollection of the characteristic movements of these semi-savages, especially as the claret and champagne rather fermented in my brain, and possessed me with the idea that it was my duty to mingle in the bounding throng. I resolved that the barbarians should have a taste of Italian quality. Accordingly, I leaped from the hammock where I had swung idly during the scene, and, beginning with a Balançaise and an avant-deux, terminated my terpsichorean exhibition by a regular double shuffle and sailor's hornpipe. The delirious laughter, cracked sides, rollicking fun and outrageous merriment with which my feats were received are unimaginable by sober-sided people. Tired of my single exhibition, I seized the prettiest of the group by her slim shining waist and whirled her round and round the court in the quickest of waltzes, until, with a kiss, I laid her giddy and panting on the floor. Then, grasping another, and treating each to the same Dixie swim, I was about waltzing the whole seraglio into quiescence, when who should rise before us but the staring and yawning Mongo. The apparition sobered me. A quarteroon pet of Ormond, just spinning into fashionable and luscious insensibility, fell from my arms into those of her master, and while I apologized for the freak, I charged it altogether to the witchcraft of his wit and wine. "Ha!" said the Mongo. "Saint Vitus is in your Italian heels the moment you are within hail of music and dancing, and, by Jove, it seems you can scent a petticoat as readily as a hound tracks runaways. But there's no harm in dancing, Don Theodore. Only hereafter I hope you will enjoy the amusement in a less uproarious manner. In Africa we are fond of a siesta after dinner, and I recommend you to get, as soon as possible, under the lee of another bottle." We retired once more to his mahogany, and under the spell of my chieftain's claret and sea yarns, I was soon lapped in delicious sleep. Next day the captain of the Ariostatico drew me aside confidentially, and hinted that Ormond had taken such a decided fancy for me, and insinuated so warm a wish for my continuance, as his clerk at Bangalang, that he thought it quite a duty, though a sad one, to give his advice on the subject. It may be well for your purse, Don Theodore, to stay with so powerful a trader, but beside the improvement of your fortunes, there are doubts whether it will be wholesome for you to revisit Havana, at least at present. It may be said, amigo mio, that you commenced the warfare on board the schooner, and as 5 men were slain in the affray, it will be necessary for me to report the fact to the Commandante as soon as I arrive. Now it is true, hijo mio, that you saved the vessel, cargo, specie, and my cousin, yet God knows what may be the result of Havana justice. You will have a rigid examination, and I rather think you will be imprisoned until the final decision is made. When that consummation shall occur is quite uncertain. If you have friends, they will be bled as long as possible before you get out. If you have none, no one will take pains to see you released without recompense. When you see daylight once more, the rest of these ragamuffins and the felon friends of the dead men will begin to dog your steps and make Havana uncomfortable as well as dangerous, so that I have no hesitation in recommending you to stay where you are, and take the doubloons of the Mongo. I thought I saw at a glance the drift of this hypocritical fanfaronade, and was satisfied he only desired to get rid of me in order to reinstate the chief mate in a situation which he surely could not occupy as long as I was on board. As I meant to stay in Africa, I told him at once that I grieved because he had not spoken his wishes openly, boldly, and honestly, like a man, but had masked an ungrateful cowardice by hypocritical solicitude for my welfare. I departed abruptly with a scowl of contempt, and as he hastened to hide his blanched face in the cabin, I called a boat, and throwing my sea-chest bedding and arms aboard, committed my fate to the African continent. A half-hour turned and decided my fate. Mr. Ormond received me very cordially, and, installing me in my new secretaryship, promised a private establishment, a seat at his table, and a Negro per month, or its value at the rate of $40, for my services. When the runners returned from the interior, with the slaves required to complete the Ariostatico's cargo, I considered it my duty to the Italian grocer of Regla to dispatch his vessel personally. Accordingly, I returned on board to aid in stowing 108 boys and girls, the eldest of whom did not exceed 15 years. As I crawled between decks, I confess I could not imagine how this little army was to be packed or draw breath in a hold but 22 inches high. Yet the experiment was promptly made, inasmuch as it was necessary to secure them below in descending the river, in order to prevent their leaping overboard and swimming ashore. I found it impossible to adjust the whole in a sitting posture, but we made them lie down in each other's laps, like sardines in a can, and in this way obtained space for the entire cargo. Strange to tell, when the Ariostatico reached Havana, but 3 of these passengers had paid the debt of nature. As I left the schooner a few miles outside the bar, I crossed her side without an adieu save for the English cabin boy, whose fate I was pained to entrust to these stupid Spaniards. Indeed, the youth almost belonged to me, for I may say he owed his life to my interference. Previous to the voyage, while waiting in the harbour of Havana for a crew, our vessel was anchored near the wharves, next to an English merchantman. One afternoon I heard a scream from the neighbouring craft, and perceived a boy rush from the cabin with his face dyed in blood. He was instantly pursued by a burly seaman, inflicting blows with his fist. I implored the brute to desist, but my interference seemed to augment his choser to such a degree that he seized a handspike to knock the stripling down. Upon this I called the child to leap overboard, at the same time commanding a hand to lower my boat and scull in the direction of his fall. The boy obeyed my voice, and in a few minutes I had him on board blessing me for his safety. But the drunken Briton vented his rage in the most indecent language, and had his boat been aboard, I doubt not a summary visit would have terminated in a fight on my deck. However, as good luck would have it, his skiff was at the landing, so that there was ample time, before he could reach the Ariostatico, to tie up the bruised face and broken rib of the child, and to conceal him in the house of a Spanish crone in Havana, who cured the maladies of credulous seamen by witchcraft. After nightfall the master of the British vessel came aboard to claim his boy, but as he was petulant and seemed disposed to carry matters with a high hand, my temper rose in resistance, and I refused to release the child until he sealed with an oath his promise to treat him better in future. But the cruel scoundrel insisted on unconditional surrender, and to end the controversy, I was compelled to order him off the schooner. British pluck, of course, would not allow a captain to be deprived so easily of his property, so the British consul was invoked to appeal to the captain of the port. This personage summoned me before him, and listened calmly to a story which added no honor to English mariners. In my last interview with the boy, he implored my continued protection and concealment, so that when the Spanish official declared, notwithstanding the officer's conduct, that the vessel was entitled to her crew, and that I must surrender the child, I excused myself from complying by pleading utter ignorance of his whereabout. In view of this contingency, I directed the woman to hide him in a place of which I should be ignorant, so I told no lie, and saved the boy from his tyrant. The inquiry was dropped at this stage of proceedings. When the British vessel sailed a few days after, I caused the youth to be brought from his concealment and, with our captain's consent, brought him aboard to serve in our cabin. I have narrated this little episode in consequence of my love for the boy, and because he was the only English subject I ever knew to ship in a slaver. I requested the Aristates owners to pay him liberally for his fidelity when he got back to Havana, and I was happy to learn next year that they not only complied with my request, but sent him home to his friends in Liverpool.